So, welcome everyone to our first virtual conference, the Fluidtime MaaS Symposium. It would have been the 5th symposium taking place here in Vienna. We have done it in the last 5 years, have a group of people, of experts around Europe, around the world, coming together to talk about topics around MaaS, new areas of MaaS. This year, as we all know, we have gone through some challenges, and we're still going through some of the challenges. So we decided to move our conference into a virtual session, so we are able to bring the program further. So here we are here in our virtual conference, and I want to send you all a very warm welcome to wherever you are and from wherever you are participating. A few rules that we have and few information that we have provided and collected to give you in advance. So basically, we turned off video and audio for all the participants. So we have, of course, our speakers and panel discussion participants who will be turning off the video and audio later on. But for the audience, for the wider audience, we have decided to turn that off. Nevertheless, we have a Q&A tool, so please feel free to ask any questions regarding any presentation, the general topic, and we will later on, after each presentation, go through of these questions and try to answer them as much as possible. There's also the possibility to vote on questions, so you can basically raise the value of a question higher up, and that means there's a higher chance also for us to answer them. Between the talks, we will have some questions regarding polling. We will have a polling with some questions. So we're looking forward for you to participate in that as well. It is a good chance for us to see where we stand within the community and what are sort of the general viewpoints on that side. If you have any technical problems, please chat directly to Stefanie Pichler. And she will try to assist and help you as much as possible. And last but not least, as information, we record the session, so just be aware of that. So these are the general remarks, and I will give a first introduction to this year's conference. The topic that we have selected was mastering the balance between competition and collaboration in the MaaS ecosystem. As we know that, we understand that we all have to work together, and if you talk to anyone, he will say, yes, of course, it's all about the ecosystem, it's the ecosystem play, and clearly everyone will say that it's about the collaboration part. Nevertheless, we can't neglect that there's, of course, competition. Who is going to earn and own the customer? Who is going to be the key transport provider, and so on. So they are the topic of competition, and this is exactly what we wanted to address within this year's symposium. And I will get into this a bit later. When we look at sort of what didn't work out yet in terms of competition or collaboration, we see a couple of different things. We can't regulate everything. On the other side, if we don't regulate, it also doesn't work. And we have seen this in the last years with such a speeding up of new services. That of course we have to find a good sort of mix or a good part of how you regulate ecosystems. We also had a misconception about the business model of MaaS, and there was sort of the notion of, okay, it's a private playground, and there are piles of cash to be made, and MaaS is just basically a commercial endeavor, and I think many have been proven wrong already. Last but not least, also others thought, if you spend a lot of money, if you produce a lot of material, you just can conquer the market by putting, piles of bikes, scooters, wherever you want. And also that has been proven wrong. So there have been attempts to outsmart the ecosystem or maybe the power of networks, and clearly all of them are not the way forward as we see it. And if you look at the key roles, and this is basically the key roles we also, as Fluidtime, also deal with, we see sort of these three. Of course, there are many other actors and players, but in terms of roles, we see for MaaS the three basic ones, which is, of course, the public authorities who frame the MaaS ecosystem, the operators who provide a consumer service via app to different target groups, and last but not least, of course, the transport providers that that of course make sure that people are traveling smoothly and safely from A to B. And of course, just 1 second. And all of them have their own technology, their own platforms. They need technology, they need data exchange, of course, to act within the ecosystem. So from regulatory platforms to the MaaS platforms that we have got used to or have seen growing across different countries, all the way to operational platforms from the transport providers. Just a short note here on Fluidtime. So we are active as a software company based here in Vienna, and we provide technology and solutions on one side for public authorities regarding regulation and data exchange, and with the main focus on MaaS platforms. So they are consumer platforms with FluidHub and FluidGo as a white label technology, allowing to launch services to specific mobility target groups. Yet, if we take the 3 roles and we want to see how they can work together in the ecosystem, we have not only 3 roles, we have many actors, even on the government side. You know, it's not only sort of the regional government, we have local ones, we have a national government, we have mayors, and all of them are somehow connected together. The same goes for the transport providers, having national as well as very local offerings. And the same goes for MaaS operators, providing different services for specific groups, maybe corporates, maybe tourists, maybe consumers, and so on. So the question for this symposium is now, how can we work together? How can it be somehow sorted out? And I've looked into, in the past, a bit how we can organize it. And of course, we have, you know, the idea of having a clear hierarchy structure. And of course, some companies, but also the public authorities always attempt, of course, to clarify sort of who is leading the pack. On the other side, we have seen, trying to build up networks of connecting these players together and organizing them in a connected way. And last but not least, to see how could it be like a circular way of bringing players and actors of an ecosystem together so they have a chance to exchange data, to exchange ideas, and work together how to bring MaaS into reality. And I was looking into what could be the best sort of mental model of how we can organize it, because what we understand from a technological point of view, we can have the best technology to bring MaaS into reality. But if we are not able to have a viable ecosystem of players that are working together and really sort of pull the same strings, it will not work. And I was seeing that sort of, you know, if you think about the circular model and, you know, the sort of the round table model is sort of an idea that, you know, it's how we have to organize it. You really have to bring players together and make them discuss, make them work together in order to bring it forward. And clearly that question will be like, okay, what is between all these players? Is there something? And sometimes in the past, we have seen, you know, like, okay, there has to be one big platform, one big technology system that does everything. It basically handles all the communication between all the players. Yet this will not work because one big platform will not do it. So we have to have a way how the platforms, how technologies can be connected in such a circular way. And if you bring it forward and say, okay, how can we manage now the space between these players? We're now coming to some topics that we have extracted, and that these are basically the topics also of our sessions. So coming from, let's go from left to right, so from the framing of the ecosystem. So how can it be established? And how can we assign roles, and how can we define relationships between these players? And this is, of course, about it's an organizational question. It's also a question about understanding who is having which role. It's about visualization. Of course, once such an ecosystem is established, at least in a first form, we will talk about the value flows between them. So what type of exchange do we have to manage? It is from, of course, monetary to non-monetary units or values, but also data is, of course, a key aspect in this type of value flows between the ecosystem actors. And once such an ecosystem is working and data is flowing and money is flowing to a certain extent or other values, we have to think about transition. We have to think about growth of an ecosystem, because it's not about just making sure everything works. It's about making sure that we fulfill our objectives and targets, maybe regarding sustainability, CO2 emissions, and so on. So we have to see also how can such an ecosystem transition from where we are today to where we want to be tomorrow. And basically around these three topics we have framed our symposium. So with session one that we will start just in a moment, we'll talk about the framing of the ecosystem and different aspects in that, and then move on to the value flows as well as to empowering the transition. We also have developed as part of the symposium, as preparation for our symposium, the MaaS Ecosystem Canvas. It is basically a tool allowing ecosystem members to collaborate, to understand who they are, how they relate to each other, how they can exchange data or some other values. And this tool is basically something that we are really happy to share with our community and improve and develop further. Nevertheless, we had a plan for this year and it looked more like this. So we thought we have knowledge parts. And here we have, of course, again, extremely distinct experts from the field, from different disciplines, and making them sort of share their insights, have inspirational talks, and have, of course, interesting discussions. And clearly, our symposium wouldn't be a symposium if we wouldn't have had the experience part. So we were really looking into how we can have ecosystems coming to the symposium and really try out how it can be developed, how the collaboration can work out. So this was basically the plan until this February, this March. Nevertheless, we had to update this. So we have a new updated plan that looks like this. So today we really talk about the knowledge part and the exchange and the discussions as mentioned before. Nevertheless, we see this now as a starting point for all the way up to 2021. So we will have from today up to next year, mid of next year, when we will do our next symposium, we will have some sessions with ambassadors from the ecosystems to work that out. If you're interested to work with us, to participate in this, just go to our website. We have a menu called Knowledge Hub, and there you will find also further information. At that point, I'm also happy to announce that we have a collaboration with RTWH. They're extremely well-developed experts in the field of mobility as a service, integrated mobility. They always have also a very sort of thoughtful report together with the UITP. And I'm really happy that we're able to work with them together on the knowledge part, how to improve the ways, how to manage ecosystems, and how to bring that forward. So this is our plan from today to all the way to 2021. But now, of course, it's time to talk about the first session that we have today. And the way how we have set it up is to have an inspirational talk as a beginning session, and then move into a panel discussion. And of course, as mentioned in the beginning, we are really looking forward to receive your questions, and we will bring them into the discussion as we move on. I'll introduce the speakers for this session. Let's start with Anne Faber. She is from the Technical University in Aachen, and she's project coordinator in the Department of International Strategy. She holds a degree in mathematics and was previously research associate at the chair for software engineering of business information systems at the Technical University in Munich. The panel, let's start from left to right. Rex Deighton-Smith, he's from the Intelligent Transport Forum, OECD, and he's a regulatory policy expert with over 30 years experience working on regulatory policy and government issues for the OECD, as well as for governments in Australia and private organizations. In his current role with the International Transport Forum at the OECD, he's worked extensively on the regulation of app-based mobility services, including high-level policy recommendations. Silvia Kaupa-Götzl from the ÖBB Postbus. Postbus stands for the National Bus Operator. She was managing director beforehand, and since 2015, she's member of the management board of Austrian State Bus Operator. She holds a Master of Commercial and Corporate Law with credit at the London School of Economics and in law studies at the University of Vienna and Leiden, Netherlands. Georg Wagner from Spirit Design. He's co-owner and managing director of Spirit Design, innovation and brand company working for sustainable mobility and smart cities. Georg has a deep understanding of business models and a forward-looking understanding of social, technological, and brand-related developments. This expertise makes Wagner a sought-after consultant for top management. A main focus of Spirit Design efforts is the sustainable innovations in mobility and also cities, including development cities in South America, Africa, and Asia. With this introduction to our speakers, I hand over to the presentation and speech from Anne Faber.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can hear and see me and also see my presentation. So my name is Anne Faber, and it's a pleasure for me to talk about business ecosystem. This is my main center of research, and I will give a broad overview about where the term business ecosystem is coming from and what challenges are associated with it when modeling an ecosystem, and then also will provide an approach on how to tackle the visualization of a business ecosystem. So it all started with James F. Moore, who analyzed what are factors for successful companies. And for him, one main characteristic, one of the most important characteristics for company to succeed are those that evolve rapidly and effectively. And to do so, it is important to implement innovation. So this could happen for companies offering new services, offering new products, working on new ideas, initiating new processes, etc. For companies who want to implement innovations to become or to be innovative businesses, they must attract resources of all sorts, according to Moore. And to do so, it is not sufficient enough to only consider business partners with whom a long-term business relationship already exists, but also to consider investors who are willing to fund new projects, to invest in new markets, but also public sponsors doing the same in fostering development and implementation of innovation, but also customers. So he pioneered and defined the term business ecosystem as companies which co-evolve capabilities around innovation, for which they work cooperatively and competitively to support and satisfy customer needs, and eventually then incorporate the next round of innovation. For this, when you look at this, it differentiates the business ecosystem from a classical supply chain, as it's not enough to only collaborate with direct or indirect business partners to develop product and services. So when you look at the classical supply chain, you have a development, initiation and development and distribution, selling of a product or a service in a rather linear way. You start from the supplier on the one side and you have the customer on the other side. So for a manufacturer who's now interested in fostering innovation, only considering the supply chain the company is active in would limit the resources to only this direct and indirect business partners within the supply chain. To now look at business ecosystem is for this a specific company a broadening of this perspective to not only include these supply chain members, but also additional ecosystem entities, which can, as I already mentioned earlier, be investors, could be governmental institutions, could be startups who enter the market with new ideas, new technologies to provide new services or new products. 3 years later then, he published the book, The Death of Competition, in which he addressed this idea of business ecosystem in a more detailed way, and also included necessary changes of management strategies to address exactly this new phenomenon. And he also came up with a more or less typical business ecosystem. As a side note here, he addressed this term business ecosystem from a more company central way. So for him, it was always the company who's in the center of its own business ecosystem, with a core business of direct suppliers and distribution channels, then the extended enterprise with the customers and the customers of the customers, and of course in the other direction, the suppliers of my suppliers, and then the business ecosystem being even larger, including, as I said, governmental agencies, which also influence the market in which a company is active, with publishing new regulations, new policies, but also investors, as I said. Or what is also very interesting to see, what are competitors doing? Where makes it sense to include my competitor in a new project when trying a new service or a new idea? There's of course another perspective to look at business ecosystem, which is more to look at, for example, an industry, a market, or to look at a knowledge transfer or specific innovation, so that you don't have one enterprise in the core of the business ecosystem, but you have the aim why a lot of companies come together to collaborate and to compete. When analyzing business ecosystem, I identified two main challenges in my research. And the first one, of course, is the business ecosystem data, which is, of course, the main part when you analyze and model a business ecosystem. Thereby, I mean really the data which gives information about the business ecosystem of the specific entities which are part of the business ecosystem, or the relations these entities have among them. This information is, of course, vast. There is a lot already published on websites. So companies present with whom they are working, what funding opportunities they used or they provided, but also, of course, there are existing databases for startups. It might be Gründerszene, or if you are more internationally, it might be Angels List. Of course, Crunchbase is a well-established database. But what is also relevant for business ecosystem and to collect all the necessary information is, of course, newspaper articles. So what new projects have been involved? Where is a new collaboration happening between two companies which might have before only been competitors? And what is also relevant to consider is that the business ecosystem is continuously changing. So it's not enough to just take the effort to model the business ecosystem once, to analyze the data once, and then to say, okay, now I know all about the business ecosystem, but to do this on a continuous basis as new relations emerge between two entities, but also new entities enter the business ecosystem or existing ones leave the ecosystem. The other challenge I identified is the perspectives you have. So this is also valid for both perspectives, which I mentioned earlier. So if you have a more company-central business ecosystem or more industry or innovation-centered ecosystem, it is always relevant to include multiple perspectives. So even if you say now, I would like to analyze the mobility business ecosystem, this is almost impossible for only one company to do so, because it's only considering its own idea of how the ecosystem looks like. So it's always relevant to include other aspects as well. If you look at more this company perspective of a business ecosystem, then you have the different perspectives of departments, for example. If you look at the legal department, they might be more interested in what contracts are already there and established, which contracts are on their way. But for market analysts, it's more relevant to see what startups are offering new services and new markets or products. So in research, there has been an approach well established to visualize business ecosystem to better understand what is happening. And the visualizations you see here are from a professor from the US. His name is Bozzoli. He developed very sophisticated visualization tools, which he also published and made openly available to show where are different relations already existing, what are clusters in the ecosystem, what are keystone players. So for now, I would like to give an idea of how to model and visualize a business ecosystem when really starting from scratch. Therefore, I used one of the approaches this Professor Basoli together with Professor Iyer published earlier, consisting of 4 steps. The first step of this visualization is to determine the industry structure. For this, you can use company websites, industry publications, which describe the industry which you would like to visualize. So here I'm now focusing not on the company-centric business ecosystem, but on the more industry or idea-centered business ecosystem. So what I put here is the generic value network for the automotive industry. So you have the different categories of entities which participate in this industry. So you have the customer, you have the e-payment provider, you have the mobility service aggregator, etc. So the first step is to get an idea of how this industry looks like, what categories are relevant to consider when modeling and visualizing this business ecosystem. The next step then is to identify companies and their attributes, so to fill the information. For this, you can say you can start, as I mentioned earlier, existing databases. For example, a Crunchbase, which provides service also for free, but of course more sophisticated services for pro users. You can apply several filters and then identify, or you get a list of companies, and of course with a special focus on how they funded other companies or how they were funded themselves. But you can always start with this to get a list of all companies and their attributes, to then maybe visit the websites, to also look at other databases, to then enlarge the information underneath. And the next point then, targeting the visualization, is to finalize the semantics for nodes and dependencies, so how you want to visualize it. For this, you can look at different visualization types. I published here the visualizations I used in the tool I developed within my research. So that this is the adjacency matrix or the force layout. All visualizations come with a benefit, so that they have specific usage, why this visualization is good to have, and of course also with limitations. And then in the next step, you visualize the data you gathered, you analyze it, and you interpret it. For this, if you don't have the opportunities to develop your own visualizations tools, you of course can use existing tools which are available, for example, Tableau or Gephi, Qlink, or for example, the visualizations tools Professor Raoul Basoli published. Then you can use these visualizations to, as I said earlier, identify clusters, identify missing links between categories of entities, but also specific entities. So if you analyze where links are missing, you can easily do this with the visualizations I just showed. As this conference targets specifically the mobility business ecosystem, I also wanted to share some research I've done in the beginning. In 2017, the aim was to better understand which companies are already offering user-centered mobility services, to get more into the direction of mobility as a service. I applied this process. So in the first step, I determined the industry structure as a very first approach for modeling and visualizing the business ecosystem of this mobility case. And I identified, of course, the automotive OEMs, the parts suppliers, but also now the technology companies who are addressing, for example, a new way to get products from A to B, and the underneath lying platform on connectivity provider. But what I also thought was very interesting to see how new competitors of affected industries enter the business ecosystem. For example, insurance companies now targeting to offer insurance based on the mobility behavior. So it's also relevant to consider these category within your business ecosystem. And what I said earlier, of course, public institutions are highly relevant, as they can foster new developments, enable new collaborations, enable, for example, the sharing of data, which was not possible before. I also used Crunchbase at this time to identify companies and their attributes. This is a very nice starting point as you start with an already, let's say, larger amount of data. And then I decided to use a modified ego network. So I decided to put the services, as I said, this user-centered mobility services in the center of the visualizations, and to put all the all the other companies and categories on the outside layer of the ego network, to then see, okay, are there a lot of relations already existing to these user-centered mobility services? And what I've shown you here is this example of BMW and the mobility services in the center. So you can use this visualization to get an understanding. This is of course filtered for the case of BMW, to see that BMW is already offering and funding quite a lot of user-centered mobility services, to maybe get an idea of, okay, they are interested in this field already. If you're looking for new opportunities for your own projects, for your own startup, but also to then filter for other companies to see, okay, why are they not actively or not as actively, and where they are missing links. I hope this was not too fast and not too much. As I said, it's a pleasure for me to talk about this topic, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was very great. Thank you. I have actually some questions immediately. So when we think now about a mobility ecosystem, and let's say a group of stakeholders or actors decides to make such a visualization or collect data to analyze their ecosystem, in like practical terms, is how much time would it take? Let's say we have a region in Austria that wants to go about this. How much effort it is to set up such an ecosystem visualization?
I mean, this to give a general answer is, I think, rather tough. Of course, it depends on how many resources you already can include in this endeavor. So, of course, if it's a single person analyzing and modeling the business ecosystem, it might take a while, because there also you have only this one perspective. So it might take more iterations to get to a point that you have visualizations which you can use to better understand the ecosystem. But if you have a strong collaboration, it can be done in months, I would say. So of course, if you start from scratch, it's of course first discussions about what is interesting. So you don't immediately start to have a visualization there, but first you need to, what I said, determine what is interesting of the industry structure behind. So what are categories of enterprises, of governmental institutions which might be relevant for you? And when you have this done, then you can use as a first step already, as I said, existing databases to have this critical mass of information and to visualize that, which of course provides the interest. So you have now a visualization, but to really have a benefit in the visualization, then it's important to iterate over this visualization, over the data which is there, to see, okay, where are other data sources I can include, where are other persons or perspectives, companies I can include in my endeavor of modeling and visualizing the business ecosystem.
And when you have established such a visualization, can you read out sort of a quality of a network? So let's say you have two different mobility ecosystems and you're comparing them next to each other. Is it possible to understand sort of the quality or maybe the maturity level of an ecosystem just by understanding the data and the networks behind? Is that a possibility?
I think especially if you have the opportunity to compare to two business ecosystems. So if you have, for example, in the mobility scene, a smart city, which very successfully provides this, and then you have another city which is just starting to address this topic, then of course comparing is very easy to identify, okay, where are missing links, where are maybe an entire category which is very active in the first mentioned ecosystem and is not even present in the second one. So then, of course, you can say, okay, the second ecosystem is not as strong because of. If you only if you only have like one business ecosystem, so nothing to compare with, then of course it's also the determination of what do you mean with successful. Is it a business model underneath? So then is everything addressed within this business, for example, business model canvas. But it gets more difficult if you have nothing to compare with.
Of course. And regarding, having this sort of visualization and the data, how do you see it being used within the companies or organizations, basically after that? Is it basic, and how much do you see there, like, so surprises of, okay, that's my network, that's how I work with it, and how much is it used then also to develop it further?
So I think what especially established companies are very good at is their competitor analysis, as it's a specific market of where they can also outsource this kind of information. So normally this is very well established. But if you go more into, for example, what I said earlier, which contracts are established, this, for example, is often only known within departments and not company-wide. So there, if you have this business ecosystem perspective, it can contribute a lot to new knowledge. Also, it always comes back to sharing the knowledge, which might be only within individuals of the company. So if you have one of these analyzing tool and visualizations, and you can motivate the people to contribute to this, then it ends up in them sharing and also building upon this knowledge.
Okay. And you have dealt with different types of business domains. If you compare the mobility domain with others, do you see any specifica? Or is it comparable to other business domains?
I think for the mobility ecosystem, it's really rather also companies and startups, because it's a very disruptive field currently. So it's because of this disruption, it's rapidly changing, I think, especially at the moment. So I analyzed other business ecosystems, which of course also changed, but in a slower rate, I would say.
Okay. Steffi, I think you received some questions within the chat, as I understand.
Yes. So for all attendees, please, if you have questions now to NFL, please just write with the Q&A questions, and I will ask them directly to her. And so we received one question from Martin, and he asked, what has to be shared in a business ecosystem, Anna? So like a common vision or just interest of the stakeholders. So what needs to be considered?
I think this also depends on the perspective. So if you are just interested to understand what kind of collaboration is happening, who are active players, entities within this ecosystem, then you can use only publicly available information. Of course, then the ecosystem modeling or model you will achieve is on a rather surface level. So if you then have a modeling endeavor where you share more knowledge, which you might not share with the public, but share with some specific entities or business partners, or maybe competitors in some cases, then it might be that you have the idea of which new product you want to develop, or which new technology you want to include, that you have this at the center of your modeling activities.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question by myself. So did you provide this visualization to the companies that you have shown us, to BMW? And so how did they use the visualization? Do you know that? Did you follow up with them?
Yeah, so I also had activities done which were not published, so that I kind of like consulted a company in modeling their own business ecosystem. Then this information was of course not shared publicly, but it was established so that they can use it on a daily basis. We also started then with knowledge they already had in their knowledge management system. So already existing collaborations, already existing competitor analysis, already existing startups they had analyzed in the past, and then to just provide the visualizations on top, also to structure the information maybe, because if it was only available in unstructured information, and then to provide everyone the visualizations.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the attendees side? Because otherwise, we will continue with the panel discussion, and I think we will start with a small polling market. What do you think?
That sounds good. Let's do that.
Because we prepared the questions for you that concentrates on the ecosystem and your experience with the ecosystem. So please, everyone who has the Zoom app on the desktop or on the app, please vote now that I can see that it is working. For all the others who are visiting just via the browser, I think it's not possible, but to just get an idea. So we want to know, if you think of a specific MaaS region, do you know, is it transparent to you who are the key stakeholders are? So who are involved? Do you know them? Okay, I see them moving. So there we are getting answers here. That's good. It's perfect. And it's, yeah, it's quite moving into transparent, but with limitations. So I think we all experience that there are a lot of ecosystems that we know some players, but we don't know everything about them, and it's not that easy to work together. So Maggie, do you think should we just start with the first question, then we come back to talk about the other one?
What do you mean with the first question?
To start with the panel.
Yeah, I think that's the first from the polling, and then was about the tool side. Maybe the second question on the polling.
Okay,
that's very clear in terms of course, that tools can help.
Okay, and yes, and the second question is about the tools. If you think that it helps to develop and improve the collaboration, it seems that yeah, more than 70% think that it will help them. So I think everyone wants visualization tools from now on.
And yeah, let's move into the panel discussion, and I invite all the panelists to turn on the video so we can see them. Fantastic. And I actually have a first question to Silvia regarding exactly our first question in this question about transparency and understanding the ecosystem and the stakeholders. You being sort of really coming from the day-to-day mobility business and having operations across all over Austria, how much aware are you in terms of your position within the ecosystem, especially as we also heard it's a fast-growing, fast-changing ecosystem, and is sort of ecosystem visualization a tool that you are thinking of using or have been used? Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to this conference, and also thanks for the interesting input we got from Dr. Faber and from yourself. I was actually thinking a lot about like ecosystems and AAS systems we're talking about here, and I actually came to the conclusion that we don't really have any systems like that in Austria, to be perfectly honest. I think we're still working on them. And we're really rather struggling to install them. Like maybe when you look at Vienna, like Vienna is really working on it really hard by, for example, trying to include all different sorts of mobility offers into their app, so that they're able to distribute everything via like one channel. But other than that, I think we don't really have an ecosystem yet. My personal experience is that we are trying to start one, really, but I personally think there is a sort of power struggle going on between companies. We're so used to competing with each other that we still have to learn to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And I think without collaboration, we really have to define our roles, like work together instead of work against each other, because competition starts in kindergarten, basically. So it's in our system, and it's a very humane thing, I think, even though I'm not a psychologist or neurologist or whatever, but I think it's very difficult to overcome that as a company, to be honest, because I've had different talks with different companies on how to kind of work together and install an MaaS system. And it's proven to be very difficult because it ends up in a power struggle. Who has the data? Who is on top of everything? Who does what? Whereas we should really kind of work together and try to define our roles in saying, like, what are we best at? And maybe also what would we like to do in the future, like something apart from what we're doing now, and what we're find out what we're not so good at, and then maybe we can work together. But I think it's very difficult. Like in Austria, and the experience is that the transport associations are now discovering MaaS, and they're trying to include that in their systems, basically. And I don't really see myself as being treated as a partner in that system. And if you're not a partner, it's difficult to collaborate, because then it's always about who's on top of everything. So I think it's going to be difficult, but we're not. We're still working on it. So I'm still optimistic.
Yeah. I think that would be also a good point over for Rex. When we talk about now the transparency of such an ecosystem, how do you see the role of governments, or maybe the option of having some sort of regulation also to foster this type of transparency, to understand who are the actors, how are they related, because we see this, or this could be seen as a first step also towards better collaboration.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think government has a number of important roles which it will fulfill in large part through regulation. One of the big issues, obviously, is data availability. What data is made available to the different players within the ecosystem, and on what terms it's made available. And I think there can be often lack of trust, concern about how data will be used. And I think the very positive role of government in that area is to set the rules for data sharing, potentially to act as the data clearinghouse itself, although that's a distinct function which it may, in a particular environment, decide that it would be useful for it to perform. That said, there will be questions in many cases as to capacities to undertake that sort of function well. But I think at a very fundamental level, another regulatory function that governments need to be on top of to really play a positive and supportive role is about regulating the individual transport providers in the space. The whole mobility as a service perspective is something which has arisen to a very large extent as a result of a number of new mobility services coming into the market. And in many cases, those services have been disruptive of existing players. And the very obvious example there is ride sourcing disrupting the often very heavily regulated taxi industries. Now, for that reason, governments have often regulated in a way which has, in various times and places, really impeded the development of those new services or distorted the way in which they develop. In other areas, for example, the shared bicycle schemes, and I noticed the photograph of the bicycle mountain on your presentation. This was an experience that quite a number of cities had, that there were concerns about urban amenity problems arising from the sudden entry and the massive development in scale of one of these kinds of new mobility services. And the response was often a quite heavy-handed one in terms of restricting competition, restricting the entry of new players and the terms upon which they could play, the numbers of vehicles that they could put into place and so on. So this has often had a very negative impact on market development in a context where the business models for these service providers are rapidly evolving, are quite uncertain. In many cases, in engaging with these providers, ITF's found that they've said, look, we're often quite uncertain as to how our market will develop, what our business model will ultimately be. It's a process of searching, refining, changing. As Anna was saying, the need to innovate quickly and effectively is really the difference between success and failure. And so governments need to be very clear on that, to take that into account and to adopt a careful principles-based approach to exercising their regulatory powers.
Great. When we talk, let's go back to the topic of visualization and visibility. And it seems to me, you know, on one side, when we talk again about competition, collaboration, you know, the willingness for collaboration is there, but when it comes to the visibility within the ecosystem, it is of course important that all the stakeholders don't lose visibility towards the customers. So as also Silvia pointed out, it's often sort of a question of speed. Who is the one who is first with an app? Who is the one who is sort of owning the customer? And when we talk about now integrated mobility, mobility as a services, we have the different visual languages of all the stakeholders. On the other side, what of course we all understand is, for the customer point of view, the customer wants to have a clear language, a clear guidance, a clear understanding of how he can travel from A to B, what is part of a package, and so on. So Georg, a question to you now is about, how do you see from a sort of design point of view, from a brand point of view, the possibility to have sort of a variation of the stakeholders, but still a coherent language for our users to understand how to travel in the best and easiest way in the ecosystem or in the network?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing the topic to the customer, who actually is deciding which mobility service to use. We were talking about the value chains within the industry first with Anne, and then now we emphasized a lot on the providers and also on the political side. But I think the customer is actually the one who makes the decision which measure of mobility to take, and if he's switching over to a more sustainable mobility or not, or if he's still taking his own car. That's what we actually all want to avoid. So how to improve this user experience? We had a lot of projects where we were researching on that. In the background, you can see just a touchpoint analysis from a research project we did with the Austrian Federal Railway, just to understand a little bit more how the people can be maybe divided in different target groups, and not all the users have the same experiences. Actually now our mobility systems are very much expert systems. Everybody knows how to, for example, ride a public train. But if you have the experience to come to another city, for example, where you have never been, you even have problems as an experienced train user to use the train in this foreign city because it's different. And that's actually, these are the barriers that we have to overcome. And of course, this user experience has different aspects. First, of course, the branding of the different providers, the guiding systems, the information system, the ticket machines, all these touch points that you have. But also, and this is, I think, in the core of the MaaS systems, the digital applications like websites and apps. And now we have, of course, different scenarios how to solve this because all of the providers have their strong brands and their very closed systems. And in a MaaS system, this has to be connected. And now we can think about, for example, designing a complete new system, like they did, for example, in Denmark with this Reiseplaner, where they developed a complete new guiding system where the brands basically disappeared. I think this is not possible in most of the cases. Or you can find some integrated design elements, like for example, in case of banks, you have this bancomat, or you have this small sign where all the different banks with their own branding still have a common sign that they are using. And this idea we also used for the design of an integrated e-mobility in Austria, where we developed a logo that all of the members can use, and that is integrated also in the guiding system of the public network. So this is the second possibility. Or you switch more to a digital level and try to solve this MaaS system over a digital level, like Google is doing it, or of course Fluidtime is doing it. This is the core of actually what you are researching and what we are discussing since years. And you did it in a white label solution. So you are open for different scenarios if you have only one strong partner, or if there are many equally strong partners, like for example in the plane industry with the Star Alliance. You could configure your solution to different scenarios. Of course, I think that's a very good approach. Yeah, so that's my first input.
Okay, great. Maybe just a short question adding to this. You mentioned about the banks. Do you see, like, comparing industries, because you're working with different types of industries, from mobility, finance, and so on. Do you see other industries being more aware of the need of collaboration and trying to find a way between sort of individuality and commonality, or do you see them sort of the issues being discussed on the same level?
Okay, so that leads me a little bit to a philosophical discussion, because I believe that we are all going in the direction of sustainability. Sustainability cannot work in a way of pure competition. It can work only if the value chain is working together in a cooperative way. And I think this is the basic idea of also the circular economy approach. And I believe that we have to learn these new ways of collaboration and have to find, as Silvia said, this idea of more finding the role instead of ruling over others. Even if you're a big company, you should not just override everything and say, okay, this is our branding and we integrate the startup and make everybody feel that this is our own offer, instead of letting others be part of a system. No?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Silvia, you are nodding, so you're agreeing. You're on mute.
Yeah, I totally agree with Georg just said, because and let me add one thing to competition, because one of your questions was what regulation can do or cannot do. I think mobility has always been about networking, always, at all times, and the EU is only about competition at the moment. It's not not taken care or taken into account the fact that if you travel seamlessly from A to B, it's always about networking. It's never going to be just one who controls or owns everything. And also, I think the brand aspect is very important, because I think it's fair enough that every company has a brand. And of course, we all want to have a space somewhere, even if it's only a little thing, So maybe there is a way of finding a common brand which everyone can use, but killing all brands is just, I think it's going to be very difficult in Europe to do that. You know, because I'm proud of Postbus, even if we're part of ÖBB. We've been discussing those, you know, two brands for a long time now, and I think they're both fine, you know, and we can always work together, but we have to focus on collaboration instead of competition. And also let me point out again that the transport associations in Austria, I think they all create their own brands, which is good in a way because they're organizing transport or mobility within their region, but it's just a region. And if you cross borders within Austria, a very small country, you find yourself in another transport association system. And this is also not really working together, I think, or it could be done in a better way. Let me put it that way, because they're trying really hard to improve mobility. So yeah, I think it's still about, we need to be partners really to do this together.
As I understand, when you build up the network, you are talking to different stakeholders on different levels, from sort of the national level all the way to sort of very local, very regional, to a certain community basically. How do you see sort of the willingness of collaboration change, but depending on, let's say, the geographical scope, from sort of very local to national? Do you see sort of here a difference, or is basically sort of this notion comparable?
That's a good question. I think I don't really see a difference. I would answer it in a different way, if I may. It's sure. I think you have to start to think mobility at the lowest level imaginable. Like in a very small community, that's where it all starts. The need of mobility and the need for public transport basically starts there. And then from then on, you build up a system. I think the top-down approach is not the way it should work, because every community has a different need for mobility. So you have to start there, and then you have to start put all the puzzles together. And so it's going to be a lot of work to do that, but I think that's the way it should be done. And so what we need to do is we need to talk a lot with communities, with people who live there, people who work there. What is their actual need, and then put the pieces together via interfaces for platforms or whatever. And you also, I think, have to make sure that there's a certain balance of power when it comes to data sharing, because people don't want to give away their data. It's as simple as that. We don't do that. We have learned not to do that. And we are all scared of Google because they're going to take over the world, as we know, you know? So it's like Google is, yeah, I've talked to so many train companies and also other mobility companies, and everyone's in the end afraid of Google. And I think the way they behave is actually, it's not exactly that they're building up trust, you know? Yeah, maybe the 1, 2, 3 ticket. Let me just want to add one last thing. The 1, 2, 3 ticket that's currently being discussed in Austria is a good way to start by putting all the distribution systems together, you know. So can you just explain to the audience what 1, 2, 3? Oh yeah, sorry. The Austrian government will introduce, I'm pretty sure about that, a ticket for all modes of transport, whether it's trains or buses or like as many forms of mobility can be used with one ticket everywhere in Austria instead of with just one city or one region. And I think it's going to make a big impact basically on the way mobility is basically provided in Austria. I think it's a very important and a very good project.
Steffi, you joined again.
Yes.
Questions from the
I joined
audience?
again because there are so many questions already from the attendees. I thought maybe I just interrupted because I just saw like Silvia, I don't agree with you. So okay, now we need to interfere here. So Søren has said that he disagrees with you on EU only on competition. EU regulation multimodal mobility services actually covers the issues under discussion. So you can see the question as well in the Q&As if you want.
Yeah, I've read a couple of questions from you, Søren, actually, and I thought, oh, there's someone who's interested and also knows something about mobility. But I'm just giving you my perspective, and from my perspective as a company and as someone who's trying to improve mobility within Austria, not by only offering bus services, but also something else. I just don't see that. Maybe the regulation is not known to all of us, but it doesn't have an impact. And what I see is that the European Commission is pointing on towards Austria, because we're, I don't know, there's two train companies competing with each other, and one is being whatever, the bad guy, and the other is the good guy, or there is procurements for bus companies and stuff like that. That's my business, basically, my everyday business. So I just, maybe it's a communication problem, or I don't know, but yeah. I feel we're still not allowed, basically, to talk to competitors. There's 1,000 bus companies in Austria, and I'm actually not really allowed to share information with my competitors. That's a fact.
And I think I have another question that fits perfectly well from RTWH, and he asked if working on many different local solutions in mobility will not lead to what is needed according to the EU mobility vision. So we have cross-border standards, cooperative models and views that can be interrelated. And in the meantime, the European Union will fulfill regulatory roles. So what is the scope on the way forward here? So, or even Rex, you can, if you want, you can answer this question as well. Maybe you both.
Okay, maybe I'll just make a sort of more general observation. In some work that ITF has done in recent times on the organisation of public transport services, one of the key points that arose was about the level of regulation in terms of its geographical scope needing to be matched to that of the transport networks. You know, I was struck by Silvia underlining the fact that mobility was all about networks. And so, you know, in our report, we talk about functional transport areas, you know, the mapping of where people's journeys start and end. What is that area that's encapsulated? And one of the trends that we've seen in public transport organisation in recent decades is a bit of a decentralisation of that planning responsibility, with the you know, entirely laudable aim of enabling those different local mobility needs to be better met, that there's decision making happening closer to where the needs are. But the problem that has sometimes arisen is that the locus of decision making is for a smaller area than those functional transport areas. And so there's been a need in a context where you've had the decentralization to then work toward coordination between these transport planning authorities in order to achieve a sufficient level of functionality for people to be able to move seamlessly, you know, across all parts of that transport area. So from a regulatory perspective, really understanding what your operational area is and making sure decision-making coincides with that in terms of where you allocate the decision-making responsibilities is particularly important.
Thank you. Okay. I think I have another question that fits perfectly to Georg from Søren. Is that owning a customer is separate from delivering a mobility service? How can we debunk this idea that owning the customer blocks the introducing a MaaS agent to act as the customer's guide to all mobility services available? Can you give us an explanation to that?
An explanation? Well,
try your best.
It's hard. Well, I mean, who is actually owning a customer? I mean, I think the choice is still at the customer which mobility service he wants to use, and he will take the service that is most convenient for him and fits to his user needs. I believe it's, I think we have to see that there are many big and already established companies, partly public companies that are very strongly connected to also to politics, and they are very flexible and innovative startups on the other side that come to the market. For example, we we have shares in a startup called MoPoint that is sharing e-mobility vehicles at the place where people live in their condominiums, and they can go downstairs and take their vehicles. And of course, now there starts a cooperation between the startup and the Austrian rail company, and now the question is how they are integrated, no? But in the end, it's important that the user has his experience and is his advantage from the side of the better convenience. Maybe 1 and 1 is not 2, but in this case, more than 2, no?
Thank you, Georg.
There's a question of Roman Pickel. He's writing, I guess one of the problems is that most of the player startups operate at a loss. Most probably it would be easier if more money would be in the system. So what do you think on the panel side, you know, is sort of the loss or is not enough money a reason also to increase competition and less cooperation? Silvia?
Yeah, I have at least an opinion on that. I'd say yes, we do need more money in those systems. In Austria, there is a certain funding which communities can receive now to actually start operating local mobility systems. That's a good start. And what I keep telling people when like communities come to us and go like, we want to introduce such a mobility system, including different modes of transport, we always go like, try to get that funding, and then you need to know that it's going to take years until the customers actually come streaming to you, because we have to share something we have to change our something we've been doing for years and years and years, like in rural areas using the car. And everyone has cars. People have 2 or 3 cars at home. Like in Austria, it's horribly going up and has been going up for like the last 20 years. And in order to make people decide that they're going to get rid of one car, it's going to take some time. So if you think that you'll be profitable within 2, 3, 4 years, I don't think so. It's you need to hold on to what you're doing for at least 5 years, I'd say, because then the people start coming to you. And also, I'd like to get back to the question that you can't really start in small areas. I just want to say, or one last thing to that, I think trains are providing mobility on a kind of a large network, basically covering long distances, such as planes are doing that. But in order to make people use trains or buses or planes even, you need to make sure that they have a possibility of kind of coming to the hub, basically, and hop on trains, planes, or whatever. So you really have to start improving mobility in the smallest of all pieces, and that's a community. And from then on, you work yourself towards the big kind of systems and those big systems are there anyway. So I think the small communities will fulfill a way to actually reach the European Union's goals when it comes to changing mobility and making it more sustainable.
Okay.
There's another question from Peter Katz from the US, and he refers also to Roman's question. So, Maki, maybe continue with this question, or you can see that regarding the transit operation at a loss, it's an acute problem in the US, and because it distorts the market and it causes that transit agencies to avoid demand situations that will force them to add new capacity, particularly at peak hours. And he wanted that you comment on this. I'm not sure who wants to talk. Rex, probably you.
Yeah, maybe. I was actually, before you even asked that question, my thought was that the loss-making nature, the sustained loss-making nature of their businesses seems to be an endemic feature of the new mobility services. And along with that, along with the fact that many of them have been able to stay in business for several years while sustaining significant losses, as Silvia points out, they need to do to establish themselves, is the fact that there is a willingness of venture capital providers to provide and keep providing significant amounts of venture capital. Now that has raised concerns, I guess, similar to the one that underlies the most recent question you asked. In the taxi industry, for example, it was argued that one of the ways in which competition from ride sourcing companies such as Uber was unfair was that they were able to operate at substantial losses, undercutting the prices of the taxi industry precisely because they had this supply of capital. I think it remains to be seen whether the Uber will become Amazon, and after 15 years it'll finally turn a profit, and it will have been worthwhile to provide all this capital. But the question has certainly been raised in many of the ITF discussions of MaaS as to whether there will be ultimately a need for government to consider whether it's willing to provide subsidies in order to enable the MaaS platforms to develop and be maintained over time. And the question of on what basis it might be willing to do that. And I think the answers are in the direction of whether one or more of the sort of urban policy objectives of government can be significantly advanced by the existence of a successful MaaS platform, one or more, in ways that would otherwise not be possible. And I think one potential candidate in that area is that there's increasing concern for the provision of equitable accessibility, that is to provide better mobility, better accessibility to services and facilities for people who don't have access to private cars, for people who have low incomes and limited choices. And this is at least potentially an area in which you could have significant gains from MaaS platforms, and which could justify government providing some sort of subsidy to enable the continued development of the system.
There's another question from Søren. He's pointing out that the airline industry is highly competitive, yet they have a universal MaaS, so to speak, ecosystem. How can we copy this on ground services? One travel plan, multimodal, one ticket, one price, one currency. Georg, maybe you want to point on that?
Yeah, thank you. I was talking to some European officers just some weeks ago. I think what they are planning on this level is to integrate all this data available on standard data platforms so that it's easier to exchange them. I think now the data are available in very different qualities, let's say, and also formats. You know it better. You're working on that. But I think as soon as we have this the same data sets like the airline industry, I mean, the airline industry has to do it because they have to control the air traffic, and they have to agree on certain standards. But maybe the whole ecosystem of mobility in Europe should also work on integrating themselves into a data platform. Then we maybe have not to be afraid so much of Google. What I, for example, learned is that, for example, Siemens wanted to consult the city of Berlin how to improve the smart city there. And it took them 2 years to get the data from the Berlin transport authorities because of legal and other issues. So I think if we are faster to find a common standard there in Europe, then I think we have a lot of opportunities.
Talking about ecosystem and who should be sort of involved, there's a question from Azarel. He says, how can we ensure that the virtual layer, MaaS, and the physical layer are being developed together consistently? So, you know, if you talk about mobility as a service and how to bring new services to the consumers, how far you have to go all the way towards the infrastructure, towards regulation, of course. Do you have any ideas on that, sort of how big the scope of such ecosystem have to be addressed in order to really make it work? Maybe Silvia, you want to take on that?
Yeah, I've been looking at all the questions here, and I thought this was one of the most difficult to answer, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, I don't know yet. It's something that we discuss every now and then as well. I think it's very difficult. Sometimes I use the aspect of developing a sort of master plan together to make sure that that we can fulfill what we're promising on a platform. But since we don't really have a platform yet, nothing's consistent yet, is the truth. And of course, there has to be, if this is why I'm thinking of a master plan, is what kind of mobility do we want to have, and then just make sure that we come together, sit on a round table basically, and go like, what is needed to fulfill the customer's needs, basically, to improve mobility. We'll see. We need to become partners. That's
absolutely. I completely agree, and also I think it's all connected together. So from the virtual to the physical, from the customer to the regulatory reporting.
Let me add one thing about developing one system. There is, I don't know whether you guys have heard of Rail Team. That was a network of the biggest train companies within Europe, like high-speed train companies, and the discussion, I think it was founded in 2006. And we were discussing, because ÖBB was a member of Rail Team, and we were discussing installing a common platform for distribution where you can buy tickets for trains, you know, through all of Europe, basically connecting Europe from like Brussels to, I don't know, to Madrid or whatever. And it was impossible. We failed in the end, I have to say. And because the tariff systems are so different, and no company was willing to change its system, and it was like it was impossible to bring all those tariff systems together in one distribution system. So what the airlines have is what we don't have in trains or buses or whatever. Maybe bus company is going to be easier, and Flixbus is dominating everything anyways in Europe, but when you come talk about train companies, it's like there's still a long way to go.
I'm looking at the time, and we are approaching the end of this session slowly. So I would ask you, panelists, or Steffi, is there a question you think?
I think Sandrina's question is quite interesting. So
okay. We do the last question, and then we do the wrap up. Okay.
So if you have any recommendations, when we want to make sure that national solutions also work cross-border, so what would you recommend? Silvia, Georg, Rex?
I think, again, it's a question of like coming together, discussing it and finding a solution together, because there's of course certain cross-border regions there where we have a lot of mobility, basically. For example, from Austria to Munich or something like that. Or from Vienna to Budapest, or you have certain kind of hubs within Europe. And I think you just have to sit down together and make sure you have interfaces, and you can book tickets via the same distribution platform. But it's still, again, about becoming partners and sitting down together. And I think it does work in certain regions in Europe, at least. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Rex, do you think that you can support this process or facilitate it by providing like a common ground or more regulative direction for them?
Yeah, I think, and I briefly touched on this in my first intervention, but for governments, there's the necessity to understand what it is that they're seeking to promote through MaaS, through these ecosystems, and to adopt a principle-based approach to regulation which reflects that. And the kind of principles that we've identified are that, you know, they need to adopt a broadly facilitative approach to the various new mobility services that are evolving, and to adopt an even-handed approach as between incumbents in the sector and new entrants, rather than favouring one or the other, and to adopt consistent regulatory frameworks and approaches. They may need to be differentiated according to the different kind of business models in place, but they need fundamentally to be non-discriminatory and to enable those business models to grow and evolve. And that implies that they neither try to regulate too soon before it's clear what the market is evolving into, nor indeed obviously too late. And there is an art in that, but I guess an example would be the rise of the electric shared scooters in Paris, where the government, the city government, made a deliberate choice to wait and watch the evolution of that market for almost a year before it actually promulgated a regulatory response, and was in a position to make some judgments based on actual experience and knowing what the problems were rather than inferring what they might be.
Thank you, Rex. Yeah, Michael, I think there are too many open questions, but I think we can use this as inspiration for probably the next session as well, and maybe afterwards. So just that you know, I have all these questions from you, and I try to answer them, and maybe we find another way to give you answers to these questions that we have no time to answer yet. But I really thank you for all your participation, dear dentists at home. So Michael, I give it back to you.
Thank you. As we come to an end, I would like to ask you panelists for a final statement. We talked a lot about the possibilities. I think also about the willingness and the needs. I think we understand pretty well where we want to go to. But maybe you have a statement for us, and also some tips how we can go further. Silvia, you want to start?
I'd start. Something maybe reflecting the last question a bit. Can it be profitable if you work in a public transport sector? Yes, I think you can, but I also think you need public funding, because it's a bit of a government's responsibility to provide mobility for everyone. And I think there's nothing to be, well, it's okay if you actually receive public funding. And mobility and improving mobility is more about making the world a better place than about making profit.
Thank you. Rex?
I think I'd say that mobility as a service has a great deal of potential in terms of achieving a number of government's objectives across the field of urban policy. It very much lines up with the idea of sustainable urban and mobility plans and the shift toward more sustainable modes. But government will have to play a very important role if that potential is to be realised, and it has to recognise that there are some short-term pressures on it in various areas, including the politics of incumbents seeking protection from innovation. But in terms of apparent conflicts with some other urban values, the use of scarce urban space. And so there's a strong need for governments to keep focused on that medium-term goal, on the size of those larger objectives, adopt, as I said earlier, principles-based approaches, and thereby try and avoid being deflected from achieving the ultimate goal.
Thank you. Georg?
Yeah, I believe that we have to think these MaaS systems from the perspective, as Silvia said, of the customer and their needs. And we have to shape the interfaces between the different existing systems. And I believe that actually the future lies in digital solutions, because they are way cheaper and way faster to be implemented than to change brandings and guiding systems and ticket machines. Maybe in future we will only write the systems using these mobile devices, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank once more the whole panel and also Anne for the inspirational talk. Also thanks Stephanie for guiding through the questions and answers. I just shared the slide with so everyone is aware of when we move on. So basically we close now. You have some time for a break, do your emails, meetings, lunch, whatever it is. And we will meet back here in the space at 1 p.m. And some of the questions already pointed it out regarding the financing, subsidies, and so on. And at 1 p.m. we'll start about the value flows. And I think that's a really good sort of starting point to enter this discussion at 1 p.m. Looking forward to have you back online then, and see you then. Bye-bye.